Welcome to Learning Anatomy with Dr. Bakari. Let's look at the coronary innervations. This is the innervations of the heart. Lie down with me as I unfold the anatomy of the coronary innervations. We know that the heart is continuously pumping out oxygenated blood to reach the different body organs. And for it to be able to do this, it needs to be richly innervated with nerves so as to be able to execute this action. And this innervation is through the cardiac plexus. So we have cardiac plexus is created around regions of the heart and are seen to innervate the different sub-regions of the heart to control the functions of pumping out blood to different organs in the body. The cardiac plexus is seen to be made up of the sympathetic and the parasympathetic component. So for the cardiac plexus to be formed, it needs to receive contribution from the sympathetic component and also the parasympathetic component. We know in our general knowledge that the nervous system is made up of the central nervous system, which is made up of the brain and the spinal cord, and also the peripheral nervous system, which is the region of the nervous system that is located outside the central nervous system. The peripheral nervous system is further subdivided into the autonomic nervous system and also the somatic nervous system. It is this autonomic nervous system that then further subdivides into the sympathetic and the parasympathetic component. So it is from this region that we have the innervations of the heart. So the autonomic nervous system giving off its sympathetic and parasympathetic component to form the cardiac plexus that then finally innervates the different regions of the heart so that they can continuously control the process of pumping out blood to reach the different organs in the body. So within different regions of the heart, you have plexuses formed that are called cardiac plexuses. And this is what is highlighted here in black. This is another cardiac plexus here formed. So this plexus receives nerves from both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic component of the autonomic nervous system. And this is what forms the cardiac plexus around the different regions of the heart. The cardiac plexus first are two in number. We have the superficial cardiac plexus and we have the deep cardiac plexus. Just as the name implies, the superficial cardiac plexus is placed superficially, while the deep cardiac plexus is placed deep to the superficial cardiac plexus. So the superficial and the deep cardiac plexus are seen to also supply nerves to form another plexus that is called the coronary plexus. So apart from the cardiac plexuses, we also have the right and left coronary plexus. So they are seen to contribute nerves around this point in also forming another plexus that is called the right coronary plexus and also the left coronary plexus. So we have the cardiac plexuses giving nerves to form the coronary plexuses. You can see how interesting this is. As we go through with this lecture, we will see how this will be unfolded. So going further, we already said that we have two cardiac plexuses. We have the superficial and the deep cardiac plexuses. And these plexuses, we said that they have both sympathetic and parasympathetic components from the autonomic nervous system. So for the sympathetic component is also referred to as a postganglionic neuron. And we'll see why this is so as we go through with this lecture. The sympathetic component of the cardiac plexus is received from the cervical part of the sympathetic chain. The cervical part of the sympathetic chain, because we know that during the development of form, the heart develops somewhere around the cervical region. And as development proceeds, it tends to descend down. So it tends to carry along the innervations around that region. And that is why we have the cervical part of the sympathetic chain also contributing to the sympathetic component of the cardiac plexus. We also have the thoracic part of the sympathetic chain also as a sympathetic component of the cardiac plexus. So let's say this is where we have the sympathetic chain. We know that the sympathetic chain is a network of nerves that is seen to extend from the region below the skull down to the coccyx. So you see it extending along the vertebral column. So we have the cervical region, and this is the cervical region here, arrowed in black. Then inferior to the cervical region, we have the thoracic part of the sympathetic chain. And this is what is also arrowed here in black. We know that inferior to the cervical, we have the thoracic. Inferior to the thoracic, we have the lumbar, just like that. So this is the cervical region. And inferior to that, we have the thoracic region of the sympathetic chain. And this chain is a network that is created from below the skull down to the coccyx. So you see it extending downwards. And this is what gives supply to the sympathetic component of the cardiac plexus. As we have on the right, so also we have on the left. So this configuration is also presented on the other side. And this is what is saying to provide the sympathetic component of the cardiac plexus. For the parasympathetic component is also referred to as a preganglionic neuron. And we'll be explaining why the parasympathetic component is a preganglionic neuron as we go through with this lecture. And the nerve that is seen to supply the parasympathetic component of the cardiac plexus is the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is seen to supply the parasympathetic component of the cardiac plexus and also the branches that emerge from the vagus nerve. And this includes the upper and the lower cervical branches. So let's say this is the vagus nerve here highlighted in black on the right side. We also have the vagus nerve here highlighted in black on the left side. So we have the upper and the lower cervical cardiac branches. So this is the upper and the lower cervical cardiac branches on the right. We also have this configuration on the left side, the upper and the lower cervical cardiac branches. So these branches is what also supplies or contribute to the formation of the parasympathetic component of the cardiac plexus. Then we have the recurrent laryngeal nerve. This is the recurrent laryngeal nerve here highlighted in red. We have on the right side, we also have a recurrent laryngeal nerve as a branch of the vagus nerve also on the left side. So these are the branches of the vagus nerves that are seen to contribute to the formation of the parasympathetic component of the cardiac plexus, where we have the sympathetic components being supplied by the sympathetic chain, but restricted only to the cervical and also the thoracic region. So we have the cervical part of the sympathetic chain and also the thoracic part of the sympathetic chain contributing to the sympathetic component of the cardiac plexus, while we have branches from the vagus nerve contributing to the parasympathetic component of the cardiac plexus. As we go through with this lecture, we will see how the cardiac plexuses will be formed through branches from the different sympathetic and parasympathetic components of the autonomic nervous system. So going further, let's look through this slide. We said that the parasympathetic component is a preganglionic neuron. Why is the parasympathetic nerve or component of the cardiac plexus a preganglionic neuron? Why the sympathetic component is a postganglionic neuron? We know that the parasympathetic component is supplied by the vagus nerve. We stated this in our previous slide. Let's say this is the configuration of the brain, and we know that the vagus nerve is seen to emerge from the brain stem. So this is the vagus nerve here, highlighted in green. So as it emerges, it is seen to be terminated on a ganglion, and this is the ganglion here. This ganglion is located on the wall of the heart. So as this ganglion is located on the wall of the heart, we have another short, very short nerve that is seen to begin or connect to this ganglion, then finally terminate onto the different regions of the heart to innervate them. So you see that at this point, this is the vagus nerve emerging from the brainstem, and it is seen to finally terminate on the wall of the heart within the ganglion, because this ganglion is seen to be contained within the heart tissue. When we then have a very short neuron to emerge from this ganglion, they're finally terminating on the wall of the heart. So we say at this point is where we have a preganglionic neuron. It is pre because it is a neuron that is located before the ganglion. This is the ganglion here. So if you look at it here from this presentation, you see that truly the parasympathetic component is a preganglionic neuron. For the sympathetic component, we say it is a postganglionic neuron. Let's say this is the sympathetic chain here. And we know that the sympathetic chain is seen to contain both cervical and also the thoracic component. It is the cervical and the thoracic region of the sympathetic chain that are involved in the formation of the cardiac plexuses. We already justify why the cervical region is involved in this formation because of the developmental process of the heart. So this is the cervical region here, and inferior to it, we have the thoracic region. Let's say this is the spinal cord. We know that it is from the spinal cord that nerves emerge to be terminated in the sympathetic ganglion. This expansion here at the ganglia, so you see the ganglia along the sympathetic chain. So we have a nerve emerging from the spinal cord, and this is what is highlighted here in blue. So you see this nerve emerging and terminating on the ganglion, and this is the ganglion here where it terminates, specifically in the cervical sympathetic ganglion. This is where it terminates. Another nerve then picks it up from there, which is a postganglionic neuron. It is post because it emerges after the ganglion. And where this finally terminates is on the surface of the heart to contribute to the formation of the sympathetic component of the cardiac plexus. And at this point is where we have the postganglionic neuron. So this is the postganglionic sympathetic neuron of the cardiac plexus. And that is why we say that the sympathetic neurons are postganglionic neurons. So you can understand why this is so. So going further, let's try to establish the different actions that are exhibited by both the parasympathetic and the sympathetic component. For the sympathetic component, we know that it is activated during fright mode, while the parasympathetic component is in a normal state. So for the action that are seen to be exhibited by the heart include decrease in heart rate. We also have a decrease in cardiac output, also constriction of the coronary artery. Then for the sympathetic innervation, this is like the opposite of what is going to be exhibited by the parasympathetic innervation. So what we should expect here would be increase in heart rate, increase in cardiac output, and there's going to be the dilation of the wall of the coronary artery. So it's good for us to be able to establish the actions that they also exhibit within the formation of the cardiac plexuses. Let's now drive into the specific locations of the cardiac plexuses. We know that we have two cardiac plexuses. We have the superficial and the deep cardiac plexuses. For the superficial cardiac plexus is the specific location where it is seen. Let's say this is the configuration of the superficial cardiac plexus. For it to be superficial, it means it needs to be superficially placed. So it is seen to be located below the arc of aorta. This is the arc of aorta here, highlighted in red. So it is seen to be located below the arc of aorta. And of course, it is seen to be located anterior or in front of the right pulmonary artery. This is the pulmonary artery here, highlighted in black. We know that the pulmonary trunk at this point will divide into the right pulmonary artery and also the left pulmonary artery. So the superficial cardiac plexus is seen to be located anterior to the right pulmonary artery. This is the right pulmonary artery, so you see it located anterior to it, which is located in front of the right pulmonary artery, to see that it is truly superficially placed. Then for the deep cardiac plexus, let's say this is the configuration of the deep cardiac plexus. The deep cardiac plexus has two subregions. So this is the second subregion of the deep cardiac plexus. It is more complicated than the superficial cardiac plexus. And in terms of its location, it is seen to be located in front of the bifurcation of the trachea. This is the trachea here highlighted in black. And we know that at the level of the carina, the trachea bifurcates into the right and the left principal bronchi. So we have the right and the left principal bronchi of the trachea here at this point where they bifurcate. And anterior to that spot, the specific region where the trachea bifurcates into two is where we have the location of the deep cardiac plexus. So it's seen to be located anterior to the point where the trachea bifurcates. It is also seen to be located behind or posterior the arc of aorta. And let's say this is the arc of aorta here highlighted in red. So it is located behind the arc of aorta. Also, it is seen to be located above the point where the pulmonary trunk divides. Let's say this is the pulmonary trunk here, dividing into the right and the left pulmonary artery. So it is seen to be located above that region. You see that for the superficial cardiac plexus, it is seen to be located anterior to the right pulmonary artery. While in the deep cardiac plexus, it is seen to be located above the bifurcation of the pulmonary trunk. So if we try to place these two plexuses, you see that the superficial cardiac plexus is truly superficial, while the deep cardiac plexus is seen to be placed deep to the superficial cardiac plexus. Also to add that the deep cardiac plexus can be established to be sandwiched between the arc of aorta anteriorly and also the bifurcation of the trachea posteriorly. So you see it being sandwiched between the arc of aorta anteriorly, and posteriorly you have the point where the trachea bifurcates. So you see it in between these two structures. So that is how the location of the superficial and the deep cardiac plexus is established. So let's drive further, looking at the superficial cardiac plexus. We already established where the position of the superficial cardiac plexus is. So let's try and see how this plexus is formed. This is the right side and this is the left side. The superficial cardiac plexus is expected to be formed from branches from the sympathetic and also the parasympathetic component. This we should have at the back of our mind. So if we are trying to create or form the superficial cardiac plexus, we should expect that branches will be supplied from the sympathetic and also the parasympathetic component. But the sympathetic component, we know it is supplied by the sympathetic chain. And the sympathetic chain, we already established that it is just the cervical and the thoracic region of the sympathetic chain that are involved in the formation of the cardiac plexuses. So this is what we have here. This is the sympathetic chain. We have the sympathetic chain also on the left side. So we have one on the right and we also have one on the left. And we say that they extend from the base of the skull down to the coccyx. Then for the parasympathetic innervation, we have from the vagus nerve. This is the vagus nerve here on the right. We also have the vagus nerve here on the left. So we have different branches from the vagus nerve helping to also form these plexuses. So from the sympathetic component first, we have cervical region of the sympathetic component, and these are divided into 3 sub-regions. We have the superior cervical sympathetic ganglion. This is what is seen at the most superior part. Then inferior to the superior cervical sympathetic ganglion, we have the middle cervical sympathetic ganglion. Then the next one is the inferior cervical sympathetic ganglion. And as we have on the right side, so also we have on the left side. We say inferior to the cervical sympathetic ganglion, we have the thoracic part of the sympathetic ganglion. And this will include the first thoracic sympathetic ganglion. Inferior to that, we have the second thoracic sympathetic ganglion, we have the third, we have the fourth, and we have the fifth. So we have the T1 to T5 thoracic sympathetic ganglia forming or contributing to the formation of the cardiac plexus. And this is from the sympathetic component. So the sympathetic component will be supplied by the cervical and also the thoracic region. The cervical will include the superior, middle, and inferior cervical sympathetic ganglia, while the thoracic will include from T1 to T5 thoracic sympathetic ganglia. And as this is established on this right side, it is also established on the left side. So let's say this is the superficial cardiac plexus, and we say that it is located inferior to the arc of aorta and also located anterior or in front of the right pulmonary artery. And this is what is established here in this image. Going back to how the superficial cardiac plexus is formed, is going to be receiving branches from the superior cervical sympathetic ganglion on the left. You can see that we have this configuration of sympathetic chain on the left. We also have on the right. But where it's receiving nerve contribution from within the sympathetic component is the superior cervical sympathetic ganglion on the left side. So we have this emergence here coming down to supply or form a structural component of the superficial cardiac plexus, which is going to be supplied by the sympathetic chain. Then from the parasympathetic component, because we already said in our previous slide that cardiac plexuses, we have both sympathetic and parasympathetic component. So this is the sympathetic component here, and the sympathetic component is specifically supplied by the superior cervical sympathetic ganglion on the left side of the sympathetic chain. So you can see where this is going down to supply or contribute to the formation of the superficial cardiac plexus. Then from the parasympathetic, we have the inferior or the lower cervical cardiac branch of the left vagus nerve. So this is the right vagus nerve, this is the left vagus nerve. Remember, we talked about the upper and the lower cervical cardiac branches of the vagus nerve. So this is the lower cervical cardiac branch of the left vagus nerve. So you can see that the formation of the superficial cardiac plexus is restricted or limited to only the left side. It does not receive any contribution either from sympathetic or parasympathetic on the right side. So in case we're asked during examination, it is strictly limited to the left side. So both the sympathetic supply and the parasympathetic supply or component of the superficial cardiac plexus are being supplied only from the left side. So these are the two branches that come together to form the superficial cardiac plexus. So going further, after the formation of the superficial cardiac plexus, this superficial cardiac plexus is then seen, of course, to have branches that innervate or supply the different regions of the heart. We know that it is formed from both sympathetic and parasympathetic components, but just limited to the left side. And that is the configuration that is presented here. So it also gives off 3 branches that supplies the different regions of the heart. The first branch that it supplies is the deep cardiac plexus. So this superficial cardiac plexus decides to also give off a branch to supply of the deep cardiac plexus that is located deep to it. So you see it giving off branch to supply the deep cardiac plexus behind it. This is the branch here that is arrowed in red. There also gives branch to supply the right coronary plexus. And this is the branch here that is highlighted here in purple. Remember, we talked about the right coronary plexus during the beginning of this lecture. We said that the cardiac plexuses are seen to give branches to form the coronary plexuses. Both the superficial and the deep cardiac plexus, as their name implies, located on the superficial and deep regions of the heart. They also give supply to form the coronary plexuses, which are located on the right and the left side of the heart. So this is where the superficial cardiac plexus is giving off branch to contribute to the formation of the right coronary plexus. You can see that this is gradually explaining what we highlighted in our previous slide. So we have another branch given to supply the right coronary plexus, which is a plexus of nerve that is located on the right side of the heart. We'll be going more deep on the right coronary plexus as we go through with this lecture. Then the last branch that is seen to supply is the left anterior pulmonary plexus, and this is what is highlighted here in blue. So it gives off 3 branches. It gives off the deep cardiac plexus, which of course supplies or innervates the deep cardiac plexus. Then it gives off the right coronary plexus, which is a plexus that is created on the right side of the heart. Then it gives off another on the left side, which is the left anterior pulmonary plexus. This is a plexus that is also created in the anterior part of the lungs. So that is what the superficial cardiac plexus does. So going further on the deep cardiac plexus, this is where it gets more interesting. We already said that the deep cardiac plexus is more complicated than the superficial cardiac plexus. And we've also tried to establish where the deep cardiac plexus is located in our previous slide. So going to how this plexus is formed, this we should expect more branches coming together to form this plexus. So we have the right and the left side, and we know that for the sympathetic chain, we have the right and we also have on the left side. We already established the component of the sympathetic chain that are involved in the formation of the cardiac plexus. And also we have the parasympathetic component from the vagus nerve, and this is what is highlighted here in black. So we have sympathetic and parasympathetic component already established in this slide. For the sympathetic component, we already established that we have the cervical region and also the thoracic region. For the cervical region, we have the superior cervical sympathetic ganglion. Inferior to that, we have the middle cervical sympathetic ganglion, and more inferior to that, we have the inferior cervical sympathetic ganglion. So these 3 ganglia are from the cervical region of the sympathetic ganglion. And inferior to that, we have the thoracic region. We have T1, T2, T3, T4, and T5. So we have the thoracic sympathetic ganglia from T1 to T5, also contributing to the sympathetic component. Plexus has 2 subregions. It has the right and the left part. So this is what is highlighted here in this image. And of course, we say it is located anterior to the carina, which is the point where the trachea bifurcates into 2, and also it is located behind the region where we have the arc of aorta. Also, it is located above the region where the pulmonary trunk divides into the right pulmonary artery and the left pulmonary artery. So you can see the deep cardiac plexus here in terms of where it is located. So from the sympathetic contribution, we have from the sympathetic chain, which include the cervical and the thoracic subregions. Then from the parasympathetic contribution or component, we have the vagus nerve. So this is how the deep cardiac plexus is formed. We have on the right side, we have the superior cervical sympathetic ganglion. We have the middle cervical sympathetic ganglion. We have the inferior cervical sympathetic ganglion. So all the 3 ganglia on the cervical region on the right side are taken up. Then inferiorly, we have the thoracic sympathetic ganglia. So we have T1, we have T2, we have T3, T4, and T5. So you can see that all the thoracic ganglia are also taken up. So on the right side, we have contributory branches from all the cervical sympathetic ganglia and also all the thoracic sympathetic ganglia. Remember that the superficial cardiac plexus, we only have contribution from just the left side. So for the deep cardiac plexus, it is a bilateral plexus that is formed from contribution from both the right and the left side. So this is on the right side. So let's see what contributes to this formation on the left side. The sympathetic component is still where we are. So on the left side, we have the middle cervical sympathetic ganglion. Remember that the superior cervical sympathetic ganglion is a contributory sympathetic branch of the superficial cardiac plexus. This has been used up in the formation of the superficial cardiac plexus. So it will not be used in the formation of the deep cardiac plexus. So this is the only exemption that will be seen in the deep cardiac plexus. While we have the middle cervical sympathetic ganglion, we'll also be having the inferior cervical sympathetic ganglion. So you see that all the cervical sympathetic ganglia on both the right side and on the left side, except the superior cervical sympathetic ganglion on the left, will be used as contributory branch in forming the deep cardiac plexus. Please take note of this in case you have during examination. Then going further, the thoracic component we have from the T1, T2, T3, T4, and T5 thoracic sympathetic ganglia. So you see that all the sympathetic ganglia from the sympathetic chain on both the right side and on the left side are used in the formation of the deep cardiac plexus, except the left superior cervical sympathetic ganglion. So it's good for us to take note of this. So this is the sympathetic contribution. Then going further on the parasympathetic contribution or component of the deep cardiac plexus, you can see how interesting this is gradually becoming. For the parasympathetic component, we say it is supplied by the vagus nerve. And remember, we said that the vagus nerve also has its own branches. It has a superior and an inferior cervical cardiac branches, and it also has a recurrent laryngeal branch. So going further, for the vagus nerve, we have the upper and the lower cervical cardiac branch of the vagus nerve on the right side. Then we also have the recurrent laryngeal nerve on the right side. So you can see that all the three branches from the vagus nerve on the right side are taken. On the left side, we have the upper cervical cardiac branch of the left vagus nerve. The inferior or the lower cervical cardiac branch of the left vagus nerve is not going to be forming a contribution of the deep cardiac plexus. Why? Because it's already used in the formation of the superficial cardiac plexus. This is what contributes to the parasympathetic component of the superficial cardiac plexus if we go through the previous slide. So this is not going to be used in the formation of the deep cardiac plexus. So what we only have on the left side is the upper or the superior cervical cardiac branch of the left vagus nerve. Then we also have the recurrent laryngeal nerve. So this is the recurrent laryngeal nerve here highlighted in black. So you can see that the branches that are taken up in the formation of the superficial cardiac plexus will not be involved in the formation of the deep cardiac plexus. You can see how interesting this is. So this is what comes together to form the deep cardiac plexus. So this is how the deep cardiac plexus is formed. Also going further, after the formation of the deep cardiac plexus, we also have branches also emerging from the deep cardiac plexus to supply the different regions of the heart. And it's good for us to also look through this. This is the deep cardiac plexus. We already said that this is more complicated than the superficial cardiac plexus. So we should expect that it will be giving off more branches than the superficial cardiac plexus. So in trying to divide, this is the right side and this is the left side. So on the right side of the deep cardiac plexus, this is further demarcated by the right pulmonary artery. So we have some branches that part anterior to the right pulmonary artery, and we also have some branches that part posterior to the right pulmonary artery, and this is on the right side. Remember that we said the deep cardiac plexus has a right region and on the left. On the right side, if you try to demarcate it around this point, we have branches that are seen to part anterior to the right pulmonary artery, and we also have branches that are seen to part behind the right pulmonary artery. So for the branches that are seen to part anterior to the right pulmonary artery, so this will give off branch to the right anterior pulmonary plexus, which is seen to be located anterior to the lungs, and also the right coronary plexus, which is seen to be located on the right side of the heart. We already said that we have the coronary plexus is also receiving branches from the cardiac plexuses, and this is where this is also established. So you see the right coronary plexus receiving branch from the right side of the deep cardiac plexus. So going back to the branches that are seen to part behind the right coronary artery. So behind the right coronary artery, we also have branches that are given around this region, and this include branches to supply, to innervate the right atrium, and also giving off branches to form the left coronary plexus. So you have the left coronary plexus also receiving branches from the right side of the deep cardiac plexus, but it is seen to part behind the right pulmonary artery. So the right pulmonary artery is used to establish the different branches that emerge from the right side of the cardiac plexus. So we have some branches parting anterior to it, and we have some parting behind it or posterior to it. So for the anterior branches is where we have the right anterior pulmonary plexus and the right coronary plexus. Then posteriorly, behind the right pulmonary artery, still on the right side, now we have branches that supplies the right atrium and also the left coronary plexus. So that is how it goes. On the left side now, we also have branches that are given on the left side, but this does not have any form of demarcation. We do not have structures separating these branches. So we have the superficial cardiac plexus. So this left side, we give a branch to also supply the superficial cardiac plexus. Remember, the superficial cardiac plexus also sees the deep feet to also give branch to the deep cardiac plexus, servicing each other. Then we also have on the left side, another branch is the left anterior pulmonary plexus. Then finally, we have the left coronary plexus. So you can see now that the cardiac plexuses are also giving off branches to form the coronary plexuses. So let's try and drive in more on the right and left coronary plexuses. These plexuses are located both on the right and on the left side of the heart. Just as the name implies, the right coronary plexus is smaller than the left coronary plexus. And this is understandable because when we try to revisit our lecture on the heart, we already established that the left side of the heart is larger than the right side of the heart, because the left side of the heart is where we have oxygenated blood that is ready to be pushed out of the heart to service the different organs in the body and needs to be bigger so as to be able to gather the momentum or the strength to push out blood from the heart. And that is why the left side of the heart is usually seen to be larger. So also the plexuses that are located around it. So we see that the left coronary plexus is larger than the right coronary plexus. The right coronary plexus is also seen to be located around the right coronary artery. So you see it around the right coronary artery, while you see the left coronary plexus also around the left coronary artery. For the right coronary plexus, it helps to innervate the right atrium and also the right ventricle, while the left coronary plexus helps to innervate the left atrium and also the left ventricle. So that is how they are being created. So going through how the plexuses are formed, we already said that the cardiac plexuses, both the superficial and the deep, are seen to give branches to form the right and left coronary plexus. So for the superficial cardiac plexus, we see that it gives off branches to supply the deep cardiac plexus and also another branch that supplies the right coronary plexus. And on the left side, it supplies the left anterior pulmonary plexus. So those are the branches that are given to supply the different regions of the heart and also contributing to the formation of the coronary plexus. For the deep cardiac plexus, it has branches both on the right side and on the left side. On the right side, there's further demarcation, and this is formed by the right pulmonary artery. So anterior to the right pulmonary artery, we have the right anterior pulmonary plexus, then we have the right coronary plexus. Then behind the right pulmonary artery, we have the branches that supply the right atrium and also the left coronary plexus. On the left side of the deep cardiac plexus, we have three branches. It gives off branch to the superficial cardiac plexus. Then we have the left anterior pulmonary plexus and also the left coronary plexus. So if you look at the branches that the superficial and the deep cardiac plexuses give, you will see that in forming the right coronary plexus, we have branches from the superficial cardiac plexus, and we also have branches from the deep cardiac plexus. The deep cardiac plexus specifically is on the right side of the deep cardiac plexus, and this is what is highlighted here in red, and also the branch that is seen to pass anterior to the right pulmonary artery. So you see that the right coronary plexus is formed by branches from the superficial cardiac plexus, which is highlighted here in red, and also the deep cardiac plexus, which is also highlighted here in red. So you see these nerves coming together to form the right coronary plexus on the right side of the heart, and you see it around the right coronary artery. Now going to the left coronary plexus, we see that the left coronary plexus only receives branches from the deep cardiac plexus. This is the deep cardiac plexus here on this side, and we say that the deep cardiac plexus has two sub-regions on the right side and also on the left side. On the right side of the deep cardiac plexus, you see a branch being given to the left coronary plexus, and also on the left side, you see another branch being given to form the left coronary plexus. So you see that the left coronary plexus only receives branches from the deep cardiac plexus on both the right side and also on the left side. And this is what is highlighted here in blue. The superficial cardiac plexus is not seen to supply or give branches in the formation of the left coronary plexus. Both on the right side and on the left side of the deep cardiac plexus are seen to give off branches to form the left coronary plexus. So from the right side of the deep cardiac plexus, the branches that are seen to pass behind the right pulmonary artery here, you have the left coronary plexus. So this is where it gives off branch to form the left coronary plexus. And also on the left side, you have the deep cardiac plexus also giving off branch to form the left coronary plexus. So this is just limited to the deep cardiac plexus. So the formation of the left coronary plexus, in case you're asked during examination, is formed only by the deep cardiac plexus. It is only the deep cardiac plexus that gives branches to form the left coronary plexus and not the superficial cardiac plexus. As we see here that the superficial cardiac plexus only give branch to the right coronary plexus. So let's take our understanding of this lecture through the following question. And the first question is, where are the superficial and the deep cardiac plexus is located? The second question is to describe the sympathetic and parasympathetic components of the deep cardiac plexus. The third question is to differentiate between the right and the left coronary plexuses. So thanks for watching. Let's meet again.